Hi everybody. So in this video we talk about melodic writing. In the last video we talked about using a template in order to facilitate getting your ideas out on paper. I hope that you've practiced some of that. If you're not familiar with the video, I'll put a link in the description below. Once you're familiar with using a template in order to facilitate your songwriting, the next thing that you're going to want to focus on is really refining your skills at writing melodies. Now there's a couple of different things that you can use in order to in order to really hone that craft. So we're going to explore 3 different melodic contours today. The first one is the first one will be using stepwise motion, which is small intervals. Almost all of them have to be seconds, minor or major, to create a melodic line that just steps from one note to the next. This is probably the most common this is the most common melodic contour in classical music or in theater, and probably the most common contour in popular music is the use of repeated notes to create a melody. And then the third type of melodic contour that we're going to explore is using expressive intervals to create a lot of contrast and expressiveness of the piece. So those are the 3 contours we're going to explore. And we're going to explore 2 different phrase types. So the question and answer phrase type, that's where this one is very common. You'll have one phrase that that ends on, say, the dominant, and then you'll have the next phrase that is almost identical, except for it ends back on the tonic. So this is a very, very common, especially in folk music, and even in popular music. Another one that's very common is the short, short, long phrase type. This is also very common in classical music and very common in popular music. And then we're going to explore the use of motifs a little bit briefly. A motif is simply a musical idea. That's all it is a musical idea, using a particular musical idea. So, with that as our outline, let's get started exploring what it takes to write a melody. For this first example, we're going to do a question and answer phrase type and use stepwise motion as our melodic contour. So let's see what we can do with this. Alright, so put together 8 bars. In this case I just chose to go 8 bars because we didn't need to go the full 16 to illustrate it. So you'll notice that we're in D minor. The key of D minor, time signature is 4/4. On the bottom we have a very simple chord progression. We're going to talk more about chord progressions in the next video, so subscribe if you're interested in exploring that. But for this video we've just used a very simple chord progression. 1, 5, 4, 5. 1, 5, 4, 1. And this is a great chord progression if you're going to use a question and answer phrase type, because it lends itself really well to leaning in. So this where you have in this measure where we end on the 5, 1, 5, 4, 5, leans into our next phrase. So this is our question, and this is going to be our answer. 1, 5, 4, ending on 1, giving us that resolution, the answer to the question. You'll also notice that these are almost exclusively seconds, just one step on the piano. Step, 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 jump, just a little jump, step, repeat. Step, 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 just a little jump, step, step, or repeat, and then a little jump to get us to that step, step, step. So this is how you use stepwise motion to create a melody, and it's super easy. It's if you're having a hard time coming up with ideas, if you can just slap down a chord progression, get a template out, even one of the templates provided on my website, codynelsonmusic.com, and then you can take a melody and you can just start plugging in notes and just step from note to note, step, 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 and you'll find that you start to hear things. You'll start to get inspiration. You'll hear things in those steps that you can do with, and you'll probably have to tweak it, and eventually your finished product probably won't be as uniform as this, but using the stepwise motion is a great way to get started. So let's give this one a listen. There you go. And that was really, really expressive for how little movement we had to do. All of the steps are very small. Da, 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 na, na, na. Right, all of the steps are very small, but it gives it. But there's a very rich quality that you can build out just using small steps. So that's the first melodic contour that we're exploring in this video. The second melodic contour is the use of repeated notes. This has become a lot more popular in popular songwriting today. So let's explore what we can do using repeated notes. Alright, so here's another 8 bars, and what I've done here is I've actually combined the question and answer form with the short, short, long phrase type here. So we have the internal structure of our 4-bar phrase here is short, short, long, and then the larger structure. You can almost think of this as sentence structure and paragraph structure. The larger structure is question and answer. So let's give this a listen. Cool. So you'll notice we start on this note right here, and there are some things that I would like to do that I probably would take a little bit more time to make this more interesting. For now, we're just going to keep it simple. So repeated notes, repeated notes, repeated notes, repeat, and then we have some stepwise motion, and then repeated notes, repeated notes, repeated notes, repeated notes, stepwise motion. Right. So you get the idea. We're just using really small ideas. The first thing to learn is how to use stepwise motion, and then once you have that, you can build on it. You can start to use repeated notes to make it more interesting and to catch attention and to do interesting things with the harmonies. In our repetition of the short phrase, we've actually laid on top of what is a pretty simple chord progression, 1, 4, and we've made it more interesting, where we have this suspend tone right here. That's a 4 suspend chord. So that makes the harmonies even a little bit more interesting. And then I did some things that we haven't talked about yet in this section to make it more interesting because it was really boring. But we'll talk about those probably either in the chords section or in another video. So that's how you can use repeated notes to create interest. So the last thing to talk about is expressive intervals and motifs. And these are some of the more complicated ideas. So an expressive interval is exactly what it sounds like. It's an interval that expresses something. In this case, we're going to define it technically as an interval which is not stepwise. So an interval which is not a second. And you can use sixths. Usually thirds and sixths are the most expressive. And if you use fourths and fifths, those lend themselves more to more harmonic motions. But both sets, thirds and sixths, and fourths and fifths, can be used as expressive intervals. So for right now, an expressive interval is just something which is not stepwise. And then a motif. A motif is a musical idea. And there's lots of different kinds of motifs. There can be a rhythmic motif. Da, 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 right? You could have a harmonic motif or a melodic motif. It's just a musical idea. But I just wanted to include that in this video. So right now, let's explore what we can do with expressive intervals. Alright, so just put something together really quickly to illustrate basically and tie together all of the things that we've been talking about. So in this, we start off on this third, which for our purposes is an expressive interval. Then we have some repeated notes, and then another one. Probably touch that up to be this right there. So stepwise motion right there. More expressive intervals, more stepwise motion, and then more repeated notes, more stepwise motion. So we're using all of the elements. We're using expressive intervals, repeated notes, and stepwise motion. And you'll find that most of your favorite songs actually use all three in order to create their melody and their melodic structure. And they'll actually also use some more complicated rhythmic techniques that we'll talk about in a later video in order to create the sort of drive and feel that they have. And you'll also notice that there's a rhythmic motif that we follow. Dun 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 dun, right? And that rhythmic motif turns this into a short, short, long. And then you'll also notice that we end on the dominant, which in this case is an A major chord, which turns this whole bigger structure right here into a question and answer. So we're tying all three of the ideas here together, all three of the melodic, which ties in all three of the melodic contour types, and it ties in the two different phrasing types that we were talking about, the short, short, long, as well as the question and answer style. And then it also introduces this idea of motifs very nicely. Nice. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that it's helping you develop your songwriting and your techniques, and it's giving you new ideas to try. Leave some comments on the videos that you'd like to see topics on next, and we'll see you next time.